What are the key steps involved in the patient screening and enrollment process, and what regulatory considerations must be followed to ensure compliance with good clinical practice? Answer: The patient screening and enrollment process involves several critical steps to ensure the safety and eligibility of participants. The key steps include informed consent. Prior to screening, the participant must be provided with a clear and comprehensive informed consent document outlining the study's purpose, procedures, risks, and benefits. Screening visit. During the screening visit, the study team reviews the patient's medical history, conducts physical exams, and assesses the inclusion-exclusion criteria as defined in the study protocol. Eligibility verification. The Clinical Research Coordinator (CRC) must confirm the participant meets the inclusion criteria and does not meet any exclusion criteria. This includes reviewing lab results, imaging studies, and other diagnostic data. Randomization, if applicable. For randomized controlled trials, patients must be assigned to treatment groups based on randomization procedures outlined in the study protocol. Regulatory considerations include adherence to FDA 21 CFR Part 50 informed consent and 21 CFR Part 56 institutional review boards, as well as GCP guidelines for ethical conduct. Explain the purpose and design of the Case Report Form CRF and what best practices should be followed to ensure its proper completion and data integrity. Answer: The Case Report Form CRF is a critical document used to collect data on each participant throughout the clinical trial. Its primary purpose is to record data that will be analyzed to assess the safety and efficacy of the investigational product. The CRF typically includes sections on patient demographics, medical history, clinical measurements, laboratory results, and adverse events. Best practices for CRF completion: clarity and precision. CRFS should be clear, concise, and structured to minimize errors in data entry. It should align with the study protocol to ensure that all required data are captured. Accuracy and legibility. Entries on the CRF must be accurate, legible, and completed in a timely manner. Any corrections should be made in compliance with data management guidelines, such as cross-out initial and date. Source document verification (SDV). CRF entries must be verified against source documents to ensure accuracy and consistency. Consistency with protocol. Data entered into the CRF must be consistent with the study protocol, and any discrepancies should be explained and resolved in a timely manner. What are the key responsibilities of the Clinical Research Coordinator (ERC) regarding the handling and dispensing of investigational products (IPS) in compliance with regulatory guidelines? Answer: The CRC is responsible for ensuring that the investigational product IP is handled according to the study protocol and regulatory requirements. Key responsibilities include storage and labeling. The CRC must ensure that the IP is stored under appropriate conditions, e.g. temperature, light exposure as specified by the manufacturer. Labels should be clear and compliant with regulatory requirements. Dispensing. The CRC is responsible for dispensing the IP according to the protocol's dosing schedule. Accurate records of IP dispensation, including the quantity and date, must be maintained. Drug accountability. A detailed inventory log must be maintained to track the receipt, storage, dispensation, and return or destruction of IPS. This log should be updated regularly and be part of the regulatory binder. Handling adverse reactions. Any adverse events related to the IP must be promptly documented and reported to the principal investigator, PI sponsor, and relevant regulatory bodies. How should data management and data entry procedures be structured to ensure the quality and integrity of data in clinical trials? Answer: Data management and data entry are critical to ensuring the accuracy, reliability, and integrity of clinical trial data. The following procedures should be followed. Standard Operating Procedures (SOPs). The CRC should adhere to SOPs for data entry and management, including data collection, validation, and storage procedures. Data Entry Protocol. All data should be entered into the system promptly and accurately. It is essential to cross-check entries against source documents, source document verification (SDV), and resolve discrepancies immediately. Data validation and query resolution. Data should be validated at regular intervals with automated or manual checks to detect inconsistencies or errors. Any discrepancies should be flagged and resolved through query management systems. Secure storage. Data should be stored in a secure environment to prevent unauthorized access or loss. Electronic data should be backed up regularly, and paper-based records should be securely stored. Compliance with regulatory guidelines. Data management must comply with 21 CFR Part 11 electronic records and electronic signatures, ensuring data is accurate, complete, and reliable throughout the study. Mr. Smith, a clinical research coordinator at a study site, has just received a notice that a monitoring visit will occur at his site next week. He has been instructed to ensure that all the required documentation is in place for review. What steps should Mr. Smith take to ensure the site is fully prepared for the monitoring visit, and what common issues might arise during such audits? Answer: to ensure the site is fully prepared for a monitoring visit, Mr. Smith should prepare the investigator site file, ensure that all required documents, such as the study protocol, signed informed consent forms, regulatory binder, and RFS, are up to date and readily available. Review patient records. Verify that all patient records are complete with accurate data entered in the CRFS and corresponding source documents. Ensure that informed consent and eligibility verification forms are filed for each participant. Ensure drug accountability. Ensure that drug accountability logs are accurate, showing the correct amount of investigational product received, dispensed, and returned or destroyed. Coordinate with the PI. Ensure that the principal investigator is available to answer any questions and that any outstanding protocol deviations are noted and addressed. Prepare for audit questions. Anticipate common audit questions regarding compliance with the protocol, regulatory requirements, and GCPs, such as handling of adverse events, data discrepancies, or IP management. What is the purpose of source document verification (SDV) in clinical trials, and how does it contribute to the overall integrity of the study data? Answer: source document verification (SDV) is the process of cross-checking data in the case report form (ERFS) against the original source documents, such as medical records, laboratory reports, or imaging studies. The purpose of SDV is to ensure the accuracy, consistency, and completeness of clinical trial data, which is critical for maintaining the study's integrity and compliance with regulatory standards. How SDV contributes to data integrity, accuracy. Verifying that the data entered into the CRFS accurately reflects the source documents ensures that errors, such as data entry mistakes or omissions, are identified and corrected. Consistency. SDV helps ensure that there are no discrepancies between the source documents and the RFS, maintaining the consistency of the clinical data across all study sites. Regulatory compliance. SDV ensures compliance with regulatory requirements, including GCP and FDA 21 CFR Part 312, which mandate accurate and verifiable documentation of study data. Why is the maintenance of the investigator site file is crucial for clinical trial success, and what key documents should be kept in the ISF? Answer: the investigator site file is a critical document repository for clinical trials, as it ensures that all essential regulatory documents are available for review during monitoring visits or audits. Proper ISF maintenance is essential for ensuring that the site remains in compliance with regulatory requirements and GCP standards. Key documents that should be kept in the ISF include study protocol. The most current version of the study protocol should be readily accessible. Informed consent forms, like copies of all signed informed consent forms from participants. Ethics Committee approvals. Documentation of all approvals from the Institutional Review Board or Ethics Committee Investigational product IP documentation. Records related to the receipt, storage, dispensation, and return of investigational products. Monitoring visit reports. Documentation of past monitoring visits, including findings and action items. What is the process for closing out a clinical trial, and what documentation is necessary to ensure compliance and successful study closure? Answer: the process of closing out a clinical trial involves completing all final documentation and activities to conclude the study. Key steps include final data collection. Ensure that all patient data, including CRF entries, are complete and accurate. Investigator site file is review. Confirm that all required documents, such as informed consent forms and protocol amendments, are complete and filed appropriately. Final drug accountability. Verify that all investigational products have been returned, destroyed, or accounted for. Site closure report. Prepare a final report detailing the status of the study at the site, including any unresolved issues, discrepancies, or adverse events. Regulatory closeout. Submit any required documentation to regulatory authorities or the study sponsor to officially close the trial. Documentation should include study closeout forms, final CRF submissions, final monitoring visit reports, and study completion reports, ensuring compliance with GCP and regulatory requirements. How should protocol deviations and amendments be documented in a clinical trial to maintain regulatory compliance? Answer: protocol deviations and amendments must be documented in a clear and structured manner to maintain regulatory compliance. Key steps include identifying deviations. Deviations from the protocol should be identified promptly by the study team and recorded in the study logs or case files. Documentation of the deviation. A detailed explanation of the deviation, including its cause, potential impact on the study, and corrective actions, should be documented, reporting to the IRB and sponsor. Significant deviations that affect patient safety or the study's integrity should be reported to the Institutional Review Board (IRB) and the study sponsor as required by regulatory guidelines. Protocol amendments. If changes to the protocol are necessary, they should be documented and submitted to the IRB and regulatory bodies for approval before implementation. Amendments should include a description of the change, rationale, and potential impact on the study. Regulatory requirements for deviation and amendment documentation are outlined in 21 CFR Part 312 and GCP. What are the key considerations when designing, distributing, and managing case report form, ERFS, and clinical trials? Answer: when designing, distributing, and managing case report form or RFS, several key considerations must be addressed. Designing the CRF. The CRF should be designed to capture data relevant to the study objectives following the study protocol. It should be clear, concise, and standardized to minimize data entry errors. Distribution. CRFS should be distributed to all participating sites in a timely manner. The distribution process must ensure that each site receives the appropriate forms for the specific phase or procedures of the study. Data management. Effective management of CRFS is essential to ensure that data are entered, validated, and monitored for accuracy. Data discrepancies should be resolved promptly. Compliance with regulatory guidelines. CRF design and management must comply with 21 CFR Part 312 Investigational New Drug Applications, GCP, and other relevant regulatory standards. Proper CRF management ensures the collection of high-quality data that supports the integrity and regulatory compliance of the clinical trial. What are the primary differences between interventional and observational clinical trials? How do these differences impact trial design and regulatory oversight? Answer: interventional and observational trials are the two main categories of clinical trials, each with distinct purposes, design structures, and regulatory requirements. Interventional trials. In these studies, researchers actively intervene in the patient's care, typically by administering a drug, medical device, or procedure to study its effects on a disease or condition. Interventional trials are designed to test the efficacy and safety of an intervention and involve phases like Phase II and II clinical trials. Regulatory oversight by agencies like the FDA is strict, requiring adherence to good clinical practice (GCP) guidelines and submission of investigational new drug applications. Observational trials. In contrast, observational trials do not involve intervention but instead focus on observing the natural progression of a disease or condition in a population. Researchers may collect data on behaviors, treatments, or health outcomes without altering the course of care. These trials are less regulated than interventional trials, but still require approval from institutional review boards (IRBs) to ensure ethical standards are met. Impact on trial design and regulatory oversight. Interventional trials require more rigorous safety monitoring, randomization, and blinding, and regulatory agencies like the FDA, EMA, and ICH provide stringent guidelines for these trials. Observational trials, while still subject to ethical considerations and IRB approval, face less stringent regulatory scrutiny but must ensure participant privacy and safety, particularly with data collection processes. Mr. Thompson is a clinical research coordinator, ERC, overseeing a Phase I trial for a new diabetes drug. He receives a report from a participant that they experienced a severe adverse event AE following treatment with the investigational drug. What steps must Mr. Thompson take according to GCP guidelines and regulatory requirements? Answer: Mr. Thompson must follow several critical steps in response to the adverse event AE, adhering to good clinical practice, GCP guidelines, and regulatory requirements. Immediate reporting. Mr. Thompson must ensure that the AE is reported to the investigator immediately and documented in the participant's case report form (CRF). GCP guidelines stipulate that any serious or unexpected adverse event must be reported to the Institutional Review Board (IRB), the sponsor, and regulatory bodies within specified time frames. Assess severity and relatedness. The CRC, in conjunction with the investigator, must assess the severity, seriousness, and causality, relatedness of the AE to the investigational drug. Serious adverse events, SAEs, include death, life-threatening situations, hospitalization, or persistent disability, and must be reported urgently. Report to regulatory authorities. According to GCP, serious adverse events must be reported to the relevant regulatory authorities, e.g., FDA or EMA. within a defined time frame, usually 7-15 days, depending on the jurisdiction and the nature of the A. Follow-up and monitoring. Mr. Thompson must ensure that the participant receives appropriate medical attention and that all follow-up procedures are conducted as needed to assess the ongoing status of the AE. Documentation. All actions, communications, and reports related to the AE must be fully documented in the trial records. Adhering to these steps ensures that the clinical trial remains in compliance with regulatory and ethical standards and participant safety is prioritized. What are the ethical considerations when enrolling vulnerable populations in clinical trials, and how do these affect the informed consent process? Answer: enrolling vulnerable populations, e.g., minors, prisoners, pregnant women, or individuals with cognitive impairments in clinical trials raises significant ethical concerns, particularly regarding their capacity to provide informed consent. Key ethical considerations include capacity for informed consent. Vulnerable populations may have diminished capacity to fully understand the risks, benefits, and procedures involved in the trial. In such cases, it is critical to involve legally authorized representatives, e.g., parents for minors, guardians for individuals with cognitive impairments, to provide consent on behalf of the participant. Exploitation risk. These populations may be at risk of exploitation due to their inability to make fully informed decisions. Ethical guidelines such as the Declaration of Helsinki emphasize that vulnerable individuals should not be enrolled in clinical trials unless the research is of direct benefit to them and the risks are minimized. Additional protections. Institutional review boards, IRBs, play a critical role in ensuring that special provisions are made to protect vulnerable populations. This might include additional safeguards in the informed consent process, such as ensuring that the information provided is understandable and that there are appropriate measures for monitoring participant well-being. Ethical oversight. The IRB must approve protocols involving vulnerable populations, ensuring that the trial design considers the ethical implications of their participation and that their rights and welfare are protected throughout the study. Which key guidelines govern the ethical conduct of clinical research, and what do these guidelines emphasize regarding investigator and sponsor responsibilities? Answer: the ethical conduct of clinical research is primarily governed by several important guidelines and regulations. Good Clinical Practice (GCP). GCP provides an international framework for conducting clinical trials and emphasizes the protection of human participants. It outlines the roles and responsibilities of investigators, sponsors, and research coordinators. Key principles include the need for informed consent, ensuring participant safety, maintaining data integrity, and ensuring the ethical conduct of the research. Declaration of Helsinki, issued by the World Medical Association. This declaration focuses on the ethical principles related to human research. It highlights the requirement for scientifically sound trials, ensuring that the benefits outweigh the risks, and securing voluntary informed consent from all participants. ICHE guidelines. The International Conference on Harmonization (ICHE) guidelines provide a detailed framework for clinical trial conduct, specifically focusing on quality, safety, and ethical standards. They govern how research is to be designed, conducted, and reported, ensuring consistency and high ethical standards. Investigator and sponsor responsibilities. The investigator is responsible for the day-to-day conduct of the trial, ensuring that the study is carried out according to the protocol, monitoring participant safety and reporting adverse events. They must ensure that the trial is ethically sound and compliant with applicable regulations. Sponsor. The sponsor is responsible for the overall conduct of the trial, including the design, funding, and ensuring that the necessary resources and training are provided to investigators. The sponsor must ensure the proper monitoring and reporting of adverse events and ensure that all regulatory submissions are made in a timely and compliant manner. Mr. Lee is a research coordinator managing a multi-center study. During a routine data review, he identifies discrepancies between the patient consent forms at two different study sites. What steps should Mr. Lee take to address these discrepancies, and how does this align with the regulatory and ethical guidelines? Answer: Mr. Lee should take the following steps to address the discrepancies between the patient consent forms. Immediate notification. Mr. Lee should immediately notify the principal investigator, PI, and the sponsor of the discrepancies to ensure they are aware of the issue and can take appropriate action. Document the discrepancies. Mr. Lee should document the discrepancies in the study records and note where the inconsistencies occurred, including which sections of the consent form were incorrect or incomplete. Corrective actions. If the discrepancies involve missing or incorrect information in the consent forms, The affected participants must be contacted and reconsented appropriately, ensuring that they understand the updated information and voluntarily agree to continue their participation. Report to the ERB as per regulatory guidelines. The Institutional Review Board must be informed of the discrepancies, especially if these errors involve participant consent and may have compromised their understanding or voluntary participation in the study. Review site compliance. Mr. Lee should work with the affected sites to conduct a thorough review of their processes for obtaining informed consent. What is the purpose of a Data Safety Monitoring Board (DME) in clinical research, and what role does it play in ensuring participant safety and data integrity? Answer. A Data Safety Monitoring Board (DME) is an independent group of experts responsible for overseeing the safety and well-being of participants during a clinical trial. Their primary role is to monitor participant safety. The DSMB reviews safety data throughout the trial and has the authority to recommend modifications to the trial design, including halting the trial early if there are significant safety concerns or if the primary endpoints have been met earlier than expected. Ensure data integrity. The DSMB ensures that data is collected and analyzed in a manner that protects the integrity of the study. This includes monitoring for issues such as protocol deviations or inconsistent data reporting that could compromise the validity of the trial. Recommendations on trial continuation. The DSMB may recommend whether the trial should continue as planned, be modified to reduce risks, or be stopped entirely due to unforeseen safety concerns. Ethical oversight. By providing regular reviews of the trial's progress, the DSMB ensures that the research remains ethical and aligned with GCP guidelines, particularly in terms of participant protection. How does HIPAA compliance affect the management of clinical trial data, particularly with respect to patient confidentiality and data sharing? Answer. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act (HIPAA) mandates strict guidelines for the privacy and security of patient data, and its provisions significantly impact clinical trials. Confidentiality of health information. HIPAA requires that all health information, including medical records, treatment details, and participation in clinical trials, be kept confidential. This means that research coordinators must ensure that patient identifiers are protected during the collection, storage, and analysis of clinical trial data. Data sharing. HIPAA imposes strict conditions on sharing patient data. Research teams must obtain explicit consent from patients for the use and sharing of their health information in the clinical trial. Data sharing across study sites must ensure that identifiable information is anonymized or de-identified unless specifically authorized by the participant. Security measures. Clinical trial sites must implement robust security measures such as encryption and secure storage systems to protect patient information from unauthorized access or breaches. Training and oversight. Research staff must undergo regular training on HIPAA regulations and ensure compliance throughout the trial process. This includes understanding patient rights under HIPAA and ensuring that consent processes are clear and transparent. What are the primary responsibilities of a clinical investigator during a phase I clinical trial, and how do these differ from the responsibilities in later phases of the trial? Answer. In the phase I clinical trial, the clinical investigator's primary responsibilities are to safety monitoring. The investigator must closely monitor the safety of participants as phase I trials primarily assess the safety, pharmacokinetics, and pharmacodynamics of the investigational product. This includes managing any adverse effects and reporting them to the sponsor and regulatory agencies. Informed consent. The investigator must ensure that all participants provide informed consent, understanding the experimental nature of the drug and potential risks. This is crucial during phase I trials due to the unknowns surrounding the product's safety. Study protocol adherence. The investigator must ensure the trial is conducted according to the approved protocol, ensuring that all procedures, dosages, and timelines are followed precisely. Differences in later phases. Phase I enrollment through. As the drug progresses to later phases, the investigator's focus shifts toward monitoring efficacy, ensuring that the drug works as intended while still monitoring safety. They must also handle a larger number of participants and ensure proper randomization and blinding. Phase I investigators' role expands to include long-term safety monitoring and pharmacovigilance, reporting adverse events and ensuring compliance with post-marketing regulations. Explain the significance of clinical trial registries and how do they contribute to the transparency and credibility of clinical research. Answer. Clinical trial registries are centralized databases where detailed information about clinical trials is publicly available. These registries, such as clinicaltrials.gov, play a vital role in promoting transparency, By registering clinical trials before they begin, sponsors ensure that research protocols and findings are publicly available, reducing the potential for selective reporting of positive results or suppression of negative findings. Accountability. Registries create a system of accountability for researchers and sponsors by requiring the submission of trial design, methodologies, and outcome measures, which can be tracked and audited. Participant recruitment. Clinical trial registries provide a valuable resource for potential participants to learn about available trials, ensuring their recruitment is both ethical and efficient. Regulatory compliance. Many regulatory bodies, such as the FDA, require clinical trial registration as part of their approval process. Registration helps maintain adherence to ethical standards and GCP guidelines, ensuring that research is conducted with the appropriate oversight and safeguards. What are the key responsibilities of a sponsor in clinical research, and how do these responsibilities ensure the protection of participant rights and the integrity of the trial? Answer: the sponsor plays a critical role in overseeing clinical trials, with key responsibilities including trial design and protocol development. The sponsor ensures that the study design is scientifically sound, ethically justified, and compliant with regulatory guidelines, ensuring participant safety. The sponsor is responsible for the safety monitoring of all participants across study sites. This includes ensuring that adverse events are reported and addressed appropriately. Training and support for investigators. The sponsor must provide training for clinical investigators to ensure that the study is conducted according to the protocol with proper informed consent procedures and ethical oversight. Regulatory compliance. The sponsor is responsible for submitting necessary regulatory documents to bodies like the FDA or EMA, ensuring that the trial meets legal and ethical standards for clinical research. By fulfilling these responsibilities, the sponsor ensures the ethical conduct of the trial, safeguards participant rights, and maintains the integrity of the trial data. What are the main differences between an adverse event A and a serious adverse event A, and how do these differences impact the reporting requirements for clinical trials? Answer: an adverse event A refers to any undesirable experience associated with the use of a medical product, whether or not it is considered related to the treatment. A serious adverse event is a subset of AEs that results in significant outcomes such as death, life-threatening situations, hospitalization, disability, or congenital anomaly. The reporting requirements for AEs and SAEs differ significantly. AEs must be reported as per the study protocol, usually to the sponsor and monitored by the Institutional Review Board. SAEs require immediate reporting to the sponsor within 24 hours to the IRB and to regulatory authorities such as the FDA US. MAU is outlined in regulatory guidelines like 21 CF R312 and the ICHE pharmacovigilance guidelines. The severity, causality, and expectedness of the event are key factors that influence these reporting timelines and processes. For instance, unexpected SAEs that are potentially related to the drug require expedited reporting to authorities, while expected events may have different reporting thresholds. When conducting a risk assessment for a clinical trial, how should a clinical research coordinator (ERC) balance the scientific and ethical considerations of potential risks? Answer: a CRC must ensure that risks are adequately identified, assessed, and managed throughout the trial, considering both scientific validity and ethical responsibility. The Risk Management Plan (RMP) is a core tool for this process and should include scientific assessment. The investigator needs to weigh the risks associated with the intervention based on preclinical data, prior clinical experience, and the trial design. Ethical considerations. The principle of non-maleficence, do no harm, and beneficence, maximize benefit, must be respected. The trial's informed consent process should clearly communicate these risks to participants, especially when dealing with vulnerable populations or novel treatments. Regulatory guidelines such as ICHE, good clinical practice, and ICHE pharmacovigilance must be followed to ensure that risks are appropriately minimized and disclosed, and the risk-benefit assessment should always favor patient safety and well-being. Under the FDA regulations, what are the required timelines for reporting serious adverse events SAEs during a clinical trial? Answer: under 21 CFR 312 Investigational New Drug Application Regulations, the timelines for reporting SAEs during a clinical trial are as follows. Immediate reporting to sponsor. The investigator must report an SAE to the sponsor within 24 hours of becoming aware of the event. Sponsor to regulatory authorities, FDA. If the SAE is unexpected and related to the investigation or product, the sponsor must report it to the FDA within 15 calendar days using a Form 3500. Follow-up reports. The sponsor must provide follow-up reports for ongoing or unresolved SAEs, especially if additional information becomes available. The critical part of the regulatory framework is ensuring the timely communication of SAEs to both the sponsor and regulatory bodies to safeguard participant health and ensure compliance with the study protocol and ethics. Mr. Thompson, a 65-year-old male enrolled in a clinical trial for a new hypertension medication, has recently developed dizziness and fainting episodes. He reports this to the clinical research site after a visit. What should the Clinical Research Coordinator, ERC, do next in terms of reporting and assessment? Answer: the Clinical Research Coordinator, CRC, should take the following steps. Assess the severity and causality of the adverse event. Dizziness and fainting could be related to the investigational drug or could be caused by other underlying conditions. Determine if the event qualifies as an SAE. Since fainting may involve a risk of harm or injury, this needs to be assessed urgently. If the fainting episode caused hospitalization or was life-threatening, it would qualify as an SAE. Immediate reporting. If the event qualifies as an SAE, the CRC must report it within 24 hours to the sponsor and document it in the patient's records. Follow the protocol for SAE reporting. Ensure that the sponsor evaluates the event, determines causality, and reports it to the relevant regulatory authorities, such as the FDA or EMA, as required by the regulations. The CRC must also ensure that informed consent documents are updated to reflect any new safety information related to the EC and that the patient is adequately informed. What are the specific ethical considerations when recruiting minors into a clinical trial, and how should these be handled by the clinical research team? Answer: when recruiting minors into a clinical trial, the ethical considerations include parental or guardian consent. Informed consent must be obtained from a parent or legal guardian, and assent from the minor may also be required depending on their age and understanding as per ethical guidelines in 45 CFR 46 US. Regulations for human subjects. Risk assessment. The minimal risk standard must be followed, ensuring that the trial does not expose the minor to risks greater than those typically encountered in daily life or routine medical exams. Age-appropriate communication. The CRC should ensure that the information provided to minors is understandable in accordance with their age and comprehension level, and that it respects their autonomy. Ethical oversight. The Institutional Review Board must approve any study involving minors, ensuring that the study design is appropriate and that the risks to minors are minimized. Ethical guidelines such as ICHE and 45 CFR 46 are critical in ensuring the protection of minors in clinical trials, as well as ensuring that the study complies with local regulations regarding vulnerable populations. How should a clinical research coordinator, CRC, handle the situation if a patient withdraws consent during an ongoing clinical trial? Answer: when a patient withdraws consent during an ongoing clinical trial, the CRC must follow these steps. Document the withdrawal. The withdrawal of consent must be documented in the patient's medical records and reported to the study sponsor. Ensure no coercion. The CRC should confirm that the withdrawal was made freely without any coercion and that the patient fully understands the consequences of withdrawal. Data use post-withdrawal. According to FDA regulations, if the patient withdraws consent, the study data up to that point can still be used unless the patient explicitly requests that their data be excluded. Ethical considerations. The CRC must ensure the patient's confidentiality is maintained and that the withdrawal does not compromise the integrity of the trial or other participants' safety. Relevant guidelines, such as ICHE and FDA 21 CFR 312, address the proper handling of consent withdrawal, emphasizing patient autonomy and ethical study conduct. What should be included in the informed consent form to ensure compliance with ethical standards, especially in cases where the trial involves new or experimental drugs? Answer: the informed consent form should include the following components to ensure compliance with ethical standards. Clear description of the study. The purpose, duration, and procedures involved in the clinical trial should be described in simple, non-technical language. Potential risks and benefits. The potential risks, both known and unknown, and the expected benefits of participating in the study should be outlined. Special attention should be given to experimental drugs, as the risk-benefit ratio must be transparently communicated. Confidentiality assurance. The form must outline how the participants' personal and health information will be kept confidential in accordance with laws such as HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, voluntary participation and right to withdraw. It must clearly state that participation is voluntary and that the participant can withdraw at any time without penalty, as per ICHE and FDA 21 CFR 50. These guidelines ensure that participants are fully informed and their rights are protected, particularly in high-risk or experimental trials. MS. Elena, an elderly patient with mild cognitive impairment, is considering participation in a clinical trial for a new Alzheimer's drug. How should the Clinical Research Coordinator, CRC, approach the informed consent process with MS, Elena and her caregiver? Answer. The CRC should involve the caregiver. Given MS, Elena's cognitive impairment, the CRC should ensure that a caregiver is present to help explain the trial details and ensure that the decision-making process is clear. This ensures that both the patient and the caregiver understand the trial. Simplify information. The CRC should present the information using simple language and visual aids to help MS, Elena understand the purpose, procedures, and risks of the study. Check understanding. The CRC should assess MS, Elena's ability to provide assent and verify that she is capable of making an informed decision. For patients with cognitive impairment, the best interest of the patient must be prioritized and ethical principles of autonomy and beneficence should be adhered to. Review risks and benefits. It is critical to explain both the potential risks and benefits of participating, particularly since experimental drugs may involve higher uncertainty. Guidelines from ICHE, FDA 21 CFR 50 and ethical frameworks for vulnerable populations apply here, ensuring that patient protection remains the priority. How should a CRC address ethical dilemmas involving undue influence or coercion during patient recruitment for a clinical trial? Answer. If undue influence or coercion is suspected during patient recruitment, the CRC must adhere to the principle of voluntariness, ensuring that no participant feels forced to enroll in a study due to pressure or promises of benefits. Informed consent must be obtained freely, without any form of manipulation. If there is any doubt about coercion, the CRC must reassess the patient's decision and provide adequate time for the patient to make a voluntary choice. Any form of incentive or compensation should be reasonable and not constitute undue inducement. Ethical standards outlined in ICHE, FDA 21 CFR 50 and the Belmont Report on Ethical Principles in Research emphasize voluntary, informed, and autonomous participation. What is the importance of post-market surveillance in ensuring the ongoing safety of a drug after it has been approved for use, and what regulations govern this process? Answer. Post-market surveillance is crucial for identifying and mitigating risks that may not have been apparent during clinical trials, especially for long-term effects. Key components include monitoring adverse events (AES) and serious adverse events (SAES) in the general population, risk communication and safety data reporting, which may lead to product recalls or warnings if new risks emerge, regulations such as FDA 21 CFR 314 and FDARE, MS, risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, govern post-market surveillance, requiring pharmaceutical companies to monitor safety and submit periodic reports to regulatory bodies like the FDA or EMA.